conversation that is taking place in the midst of a world where we're seeing the super rich, and there are all of these calls, and these super rich that we talk about are always involved in efforts, right, to undermine international tax cooperation, tax reforms, or even to pay their taxes, right? Think about the illicit financial flows that a country like South Africa alone loses on an annual basis. So this was the topic of discussion at this conference. Dr. Gillard Isaacs is with the Institute for Economic Justice. He was one of the speakers at this particular event, and we're going to be speaking to him just about why this conversation matters and how it relates back to us here at home. So that's what you can expect coming up on the Talking Point in the next 3 hours. It is going to be a big week. Later on this week, we're expecting to hear from the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, when he delivers his budget speech. And I must say that this morning, I am in full agreement with Duma Qubule and what he had to say on the Talking Point. And by that I mean that the issue of jobs, that should be our obsession as a country. It is devastating and heartbreaking to see the conditions to which millions of young people are subjected to simply because there are no jobs. They're living in survival mode. They literally have no opportunity to plan for their futures, right? They have inaccessibility to resources, inaccessibility to even what should be considered the basic in 2025. So if you think about what accessing data means for somebody in 2025, some of these young people don't have access to data. So when you say, no, you must send your CV, what must they send their CV with? On which laptop would they have prepared their CV, right? And these are all of the things that contribute to the low morale, to the mental health issues that so many young people in this country are facing. We have to put this as the top agenda of the problem that we're facing as a country. Jobs. This is what Duma Qubule, a clip of what he had to say, and I must say, I agree with him 100%.
Now, you can't have a government that says that they're committed to unemployment, cutting public employment. That is completely insane, and South Africans must call them out for it. There is no justification for cutting job creation programs. Sure. I don't care about the budget deficit. We must create jobs, whatever it takes to create jobs.
All right, so that's a snippet of that particular conversation. So getting then into the business of the day fully, let's take you back to last week. We received a call from Dumisang in Taung, and she raised concerns about the fact that children in the Northern Cape were not going to school because the department did not pay for the food program and for textbooks. In a moment, we'll bring on the Northern Cape MEC for Education. I want you to listen to what Dumisang had to say in that interview.
Since last week, children, they go to school, they come back from school because they get us closed. The reason when we ask the reason is because the Department of Education didn't pay money of Section 21 in the NSNP money. There is no food to give the children, there is no stationery, and there is no money. That's Section 21 to maintain school. So I'm asking for the department to pay money so that the children can go to school. Time is going.
Dumisang, is your child going to a no-fee school, or are they? Okay. Is it a public school? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And as far as you know, is it just the school that has been affected?
No, all the schools in Polokwane municipality.
Okay. All right. At least that gives us a good starting point. So out in Polokwane municipality, since last week, the learners, as you're saying, have not been going to school.
Yes.
Okay.
They go to school, they come back. Every day they come back.
What time do they come back?
They go to school in the morning, 6:30, but past 8 they are home.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm
Okay.
worried. What about the matriculars? What about the grade 12? Time is going, Cathy. Northern Cape Education, please pay the money, because there is not even the teachers. The teachers doesn't have enough equipment, education equipment to teach.
Abraham Vosloo is the Northern Cape MEC for Education. Mr. Vosloo, good morning to you. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Cathy, and good morning to the listeners of SAFM.
We'll try to
Thank you for
keep
the
it short
opportunity.
and straight to the point. Tell us,
Yes.
why have these schools not been paid? Why is it that you have kids having no food, no stationery, and being sent back home?
Cathy, I don't think it's exactly like that mentioned by, I think it's Dumisani. But what we are appreciating is the fact that she's been able to communicate that to yourselves and to any other person. I think it's important just to maybe just give a background, Cathy, as to what exactly transpired last year. In this current financial year, 2024-25, the education sector has been under severe pressure, and I'm not speaking of the Northern Cape only. I'm speaking of all the other provinces as a result of fiscal consolidation that we have actually endured. And you will have noticed that in 2020, last year, there was even one of the provinces that indicated that they needed to lay off some teachers. And we have taken a conscious decision as the province that we cannot lay off about 663 teachers to the amount of about 358 million rand. We've taken a conscious decision as a province because it would have affected education generally and in the negative in the province. So we have taken that decision to absorb the budget reductions that we have encountered in the beginning of the year, as well as the in-year budget. In addition to that, cost of living adjustment for this current financial year, and all of that brought us to a wage bill gap of about 600 million rand for this current financial year. But I think I must also hasten to say, through the support of Provincial Treasury and the support of Premier's office, since December, January, we've been able to disperse 280 million rand to schools. Up until last week, the 15th, we've been able to disperse that money to cover a wide range of areas, including the National School Nutrition Program that has been covered already in the beginning of February. All schools have been covered fully. In addition to that, all the textbook, stationery, and all of that has been catered for and has been covered through this process. So that is ours has been as a result of what the background I gave.
All right.
Also the process
So, Mr. Vosloo, according to you, then you're sitting with a 600 million rand budget deficit, right? You've been given 280 million. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. So that means that you still have a shortfall of 320 that you're sitting with, right?
Yes, but also
yeah?
I must also say, obviously, as a result of the current situation, we have also embarked on what we call, number one, cost-saving measures, to which we have been able to save about 47 million rand, and also the reprioritization of our programs, especially those that does not have a direct impact on the state of education and to impact negatively on learning and teaching.
I'll get to your cost-saving measures and your reprioritization in a moment. You said up until last week you had not paid these monies. So up until last week, the feeding scheme programs had not been paid for. The stationery had not been paid for. So why are you saying that what Dumisang is saying is not a true reflection of what has been happening?
Because in December, there has been a disbursement to schools. In January, there has been a disbursement to schools, and in January, early January, there's been a disbursement to schools, as well as in late January, beginning February.
But did you investigate what is happening in these particular schools where kids are being sent home?
We have received a complaint from SGB forum in the Pokwane area, of which indicated there's a crisis in about 33 schools. We have had engagements with them, even at the highest level in the province, where the Premier and the entire team engaged with them. Upon that engagement, there has been a positive response from the side of provincial government.
So what was the reason for those engagements? Why were they writing to you? What were they complaining about?
The issues that they raised, is that the money that they've received, the money was not enough to cover all the areas that are supposed to be covering. We were saying from our side...
So then, Mr. Foster, if you're aware of the concerns that the schools in these areas have raised with you, you're aware of that because you say that even the provincial government, to the point of the Premier's office, has been part of these conversations. Why then are you trying to disregard what Dumisang is saying and, creating this picture that it is not a fair reflection of the truth?
Reality is, Cathy. What is important is to mention that the issue around the National School Nutrition Program, that one has been covered fully. That is the truth. The issue around ECD practitioners being paid, grade R practitioners.
So have you asked ECD, these schools then why they're sending kids home at 8 o'clock?
No. Let me tell you, the schools did not send teachers home. What happened was SGBs, the illegal SGB formation, they actually closed schools, whereas teachers were there, principals were there. That's why we had to go to the court to actually make sure that we get an interdict to get the schools open. Because from where we are standing, there was the feeding scheme was fully catered for. There were some challenges in some of the schools, in some of the circuits. We acknowledge that, but we're working very hard. We have worked very hard to address those challenges that has been mentioned to us.
What are those challenges? What are those challenges?
There was no reason to actually go to a point of closing the schools. Even the court agrees with us on that.
What were those challenges in the circus? Some of the challenges that were actually mentioned and that we have actually started to engage on through the district office as well as the circuit managers and the head office. Some of those challenges obviously related to, and some schools you will find that there are challenges about especially your temporary teachers not being paid fully for after appointment. Secondly, because that situation created a problem. Also, the need for additional teachers to be appointed, but there's a process that needs to be followed. Schools know that process to be followed. Then also, in some cases, you will find that some stationery, there will be some shortages here in some of the schools. Schools have actually purchased it, but there will still be some shortages. So we are responding to those challenges. In education, the day that the school opens, after 10 days, there's a survey that's being done. And then after that 10 days, we get the result of that survey. And then we respond to those challenges that are brought to the attention of the department. And we do that precisely because the numbers in terms of enrollment in a particular year differ from year to year. Look, you know what, Mr. Foster? One of the things is that when you're dealing with a problem such as this, and I have great sort of empathy for the position that education departments find themselves in across the country, right? Because you are dealing with very significant budget cuts that affect your ability to operate and deliver the service that you need to. At the same time, though, there has to be a full honesty about what the impact of that is. So if you're sitting with a 320 million rand budget deficit, there's no way that you can say distribution of 280 million has covered every gap and every shortfall that there is. And that's why the conversation shifts between what it is that you have been able to do in some parts of the province versus what you have been unable to do in other parts of the province. So to the extent that there are these challenges, what is the communication that you're having with schools? How are you, as the department, working together with schools to try and solve these problems so that it's not left up to the schools to figure out what they must do?
Cathy, I think the statement you are making suggests that there's no communication with schools, which, of course, I think, for me, is totally wrong. We even went as far as ensuring that on a regular basis, when there's inquiries from media houses, that we communicate on a regular basis to media houses on any inquiries that we might encounter. But over and above that, internally, there's also that communication internally within the education sector in terms of stakeholders. That process unfolds, and that is why that you will have noticed some of the unions has taken up this matter with us as an education department through that engagement, and we have got a series of engagements with stakeholders, and we do that on a regular basis just to make sure that everybody takes note of the challenge and everybody appreciates the challenge that we are setting. I'm not trying to hide anything. That's why I'm able to actually recite the numbers and the figures to you, just to paint the picture of the challenge that we are setting with.
All
not
right.
a matter of me closing it.
I'm going to bring in Dumisang, who's the listener from Daung, who called in on the open line with this issue. Dumisang, good morning.
Morning, Cathy. Morning, MEC.
Good morning, Tumusane.
Thank you.
Yes, Dumisang, you can go for it. You had a question for the MEC.
MEC, my question is, please, why do other provinces, the children are going to school, it was fine, but only our province? Why does it take so long to pay? Because the future of our children is wasting. Why do the SGB have to close the school so that you can pay the money? You only paid the money last week. If they didn't close the school, when were you going to pay the money? Because even some of the teachers, the greater teachers and the temporary teachers, say they didn't get the pay. They were not paid in December and January. So please, we are just asking, you must do everything in time, so that these things of closing schools must not happen again. Why does it take so long to pay?
Okay.
Thank you, Cathy.
Can I respond, Cathy?
Yes, go for it.
Cathy, I think, Tumisani, let me respond like this. The situation in the department has not been very easy to handle, given the shortfall in budget that we have encountered, especially since October, November, we've been able to engage provincial treasury. And through all those engagements, Tumisani, we've been able to get some funding to the tune of 130 million rand in December, and 50 million rand in the beginning of January, and also at the end of January, another 100 million rand through the support of Premier. The difficulty, Dumisani, is that we did not have that kind of money to actually disperse in December or in the beginning of the year. The money that we have received, we have dedicated exactly to the shortfalls to make sure at the school level, learning and teaching can actually commence in the beginning of the year. The moment that we receive the money through provincial treasury, education department work hand in hand with them to disperse those money. We know that there's been, and we appreciate that there's been a difficulty at schools in terms of some of the planning that they've raised with us. But unfortunately, that has been the situation, and we are trying to actually deal with this problem so that by the end of this year, we do not face the same situation.
Okay.
That we are going to run things smoothly.
All right. MEC for Education, Abram Foslo in the Northern Cape, and you heard there the listener that brought all of this to our attention, to Misang. It's time for latest news headlines. I'm back with your calls on the open line.
Good morning. In the headlines, Johannesburg Metro Police have reiterated the call for motorists to remain vigilant after a motorist died in a crash in Cresta, north of Johannesburg this morning. The Deputy Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Steve Litsike, has described the murder of Muhsin Hendricks as bias hate crime. Hendricks was an openly gay imam from Cape Town. And employers across the country are urged to familiarize themselves with the new regulation regarding the minimum wage to ensure compliance. This after government announced a 4.4% increase from the 1st of next month. I'll have details on these and other stories at 10.
Who says talking never solves anything? SAFM leading the conversations that move us.
In business, a rand saved is a rand earned. And almost 100,000 businesses trust OUTsurance.
We're a sealing and partition company. I like OUTsurance. They have that personal touch. In addition to the great service they give me, they've also saved me and my company 3,266 Rand per month. Guys, make that call. It's well worth it.
For your business insurance, contact OUTsurance to see how much your business could save. SMS quote to 43328 for immediate cover. Or visit outsurance.co.za today. A licensed insurer and FSP. T's and C's online.
Borussia Dortmund and FC Union Berlin are both searching for a decent position in the top half. They have a big battle for maximum points. This is the Bundesliga. Football as it's meant to be. Catch Borussia Dortmund FC versus FC Union Berlin on Saturday, 22 February at 7:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
Fizzy drinks and fruit juices can make our children sick. Sugar is dumped into their bodies with every sip, which could lead to obesity, heart disease, and diabetes as they age. We must protect them from drinks high in sugar. Demand a stricter health promotion levy now. Sign the petition on heala.org. That's HEALA.org.
With Ford's Blue Sky offers, get a new Ranger XL from just $5,899 per month, including our optional service plan, only when financed through Ford Credit. 10% deposit, prime list 4.75%, 40% residual. Visit your trusted Ford dealer today for Blue Sky offers, where our Ford Family Guarantee comes standard. Limited time offer while stocks last. Ford Credit is a registered credit provider and an authorized financial services provider. T&Cs apply.
Santam can cover your car in just 2 minutes. That's faster than staring into your fridge, convinced there's nothing to eat, with hopes that something new magically appears. Only to end up ordering the same meal you had yesterday. Get your car covered in just 2 minutes so you can live in the moment, not in the worry. Visit santam.co.za. Santam. This is freedom. Santam is an authorized FSP, a licensed non-life insurer and controlling company for its group companies.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
Call us on 086 000 2032.
Hi, Cathy. The MEC is not telling the truth. Come and visit the affected school and see the language that you're speaking and what you see. Is it the same?
Good morning, Cathy, and the SAFM listeners. This is John here from Menenberg. Cathy, it is sickening to listen to this spokesperson you had now about the schools in Northern Cape. He can't even give you a straight answer. They don't have answers. It seems to me that they don't know what to do. And the word challenges, I think you people mustn't use the word challenges, because it's not challenges, it's problems. Say call it as it is. It's a problem. Say there's lots of problems. Don't stop saying it's challenges, not challenges. It's problems. To say it's problems, they must solve the problem. Call it problem, please, man. Bye.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
All right, those are just some of your WhatsApp voice notes coming through on the open line this morning. Look, one has to think about what the impact of the budget deficits that different departments are sitting with, what the impact of that is. On a national level, and there isn't a better way to also have that conversation. So by all means, the Northern Cape Department could have handled communication with the schools better, because at the point that SGBs are now protesting effectively and closing down schools is because children are coming there, they don't have stationery, they don't have food, and the teachers are sort of left to try and figure it out. So, yes, they engage stakeholders, but I don't think that it has been truly meaningful engagement, because if it was, then it wouldn't have resulted in the situation that we're dealing with in the last couple of weeks. But there is something broader that we need to be looking at. A department that is sitting with a 600 million rand budget deficit, and they're having to reprioritize what it is that they're spending their money on. Are we not setting some of these departments up for failure? Education health. Think about what the impact of that is. There really needs to be a serious conversation in this country about the budget cuts that government departments are facing. And yes, there's corruption. Yes, there's wastage. Everything must be done to stop that. But surely the answer in the meantime is not the situation that we're facing today. Because as you can see, where there's reprioritization, they choose, okay, this month we're not paying the feeding scheme. We'll pay them the next time we get an allocation. You see how services are suffering. And it's the most vulnerable in our community, in our country, that are affected. Okay, let me go to, let me take more of your calls then. Where to go? Yanga, you're in Rosebank. Good morning, Yanga.
Yes, Oscar. Did you listen to the interview of Elon's father on Tulasi's show?
I did.
Yeah, I was wondering that Elon, where he get his ideology, but after listening to that interview, I was like, okay, he was groomed, to have these I will call them elements of Hitler's ideology. But he spoke about something that I think we must clarify. He said white people are not given job opportunities in South Africa. Okay, that is not the truth. The gentleman himself, I think he has a house in Langarpan, and many of them. I believe he has a domestic worker, and I don't think that domestic worker is a white person. So if he feels strongly that white person are denied job opportunities in South Africa, he could take an initiative to say my domestic worker should be a white person and my garden boy should be a white person, And
Yanga, what was said in that interview that particularly made you think about ideologies comparable to Hitler?
The tone of the guy, not wanting to appreciate that apartheid happened in South Africa, and the notion that there's no white privilege, that was a sticking point for me, Oscar.
Okay, all right, yes. Yanga out
Okay,
in Rosebank, thank you for calling in. Yeah, I guess on that aspect of the interview, the question of white privilege, it reminded me, it was similar to what Robert said on the show last week. Remember, Robert? I forgot where in the country he was calling from, but just how he painted a picture of how white people had lost out benefits, as a result of the introduction of democracy. So there is, of course, a group of people who do feel disenfranchised by that and who do think that they have been excluded. Did you see the protest on Saturday to the U.S. Embassy? Make South Africa great again? Mike in Middleburg, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Thank you so much for taking my call. Yeah, this morning your colleague Thulas had an interview with one professor on the subject of war between Russia and Ukraine, NATO. In his analysis, this professor contradicted himself, with regard to advancement made by Russian troops into Ukrainian territories. He claimed that Ukrainian troops were making strategic retreatment to trap the Russians to come out so that they could actually go for them. Yet, at the same time, this professor says Russians were advancing, taking more territories. Now that's contradictory, Cathy. How can you retreat strategically at the expense of your territories? It doesn't make sense at all. I think what this professor is avoiding to acknowledge is that Russia is inflicting, defeat on NATO, hence the retreatment. And there's nothing strategic about that, And I really don't know, because it's an observation I've made, Katie, that most of these professors, when they come to analyze this war between Russia and NATO, they are on the side of NATO and Ukraine. They are not objective. It's almost like when you bring those who come to analyze war between Israel and Hamas. They are on the side of Israel. I don't know why.
Mike, I think that when it comes to the Russia-Ukraine war, things have, of course, become a lot more complicated. Did you see the reporting just over the weekend, towards the end of the week last week, following that phone call with Donald Trump and the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, and how after that conversation he then called Zelensky, Ukraine Zelensky, to then talk about, potential solutions. And the Ukrainian president post that has, of course, been quoted saying that he's concerned about a solution to the war that doesn't even include them. And one can see that their conversation taking place between different partners and different countries, the U.S. seemingly at the center of it, and nobody really knows where things are going to go now.
Yes, indeed. It's quite complex. But I must say, Cathy, as far as I'm concerned, as much as Trump is controversial, and we know he's actually his attentiveness, or his take on on a number of matters internationally. But on this one, war between Russia and NATO, I think is on the right track. I think it's going to bring a solution. That is my take.
Okay. Mike in Middleburg, let's leave it there. Xolani in the Eastern Cape, good morning.
Hi, Cathy.
Yes.
A couple of years ago, history tells us that issues around criminal intelligence, they were using tactics. One of them was called unconventional policing, which we later called it imp. And that the intention, as much as people ended up not using it well, the intention was to cap criminality, to know what people are planning to do and not to do at the time. Many people actually lost their lives because they were part of what is called the unconventional policing, as they were called impimpis and all. But the reason for my call is to look at the alignment around the use of unconventional policing with the use of technology. We are experiencing a huge challenges within South Africa around crime and all, and yet there is technology that could actually assist the intelligence in terms of utilizing that space. Now, in terms of understanding what the communities, what the people are doing and talking about in those base data that is available, that can be compiled by the same technology, so that those who are sitting in those offices can be able to be a couple of steps ahead about what people are planning. I always wonder at this moment, the criminal intelligence, do they understand that there are resources within themselves that they can use to actually assist in tapping crime within the country, South Africa?
Look, Xolani, I'm sure they're aware, but remember, it's not quite a free-for-all, right? There's still permissions that need to be granted when it comes to the kind of devices that you're talking about, because this is precisely the sort of thing that has landed many individuals in hot water, right?
Yeah, but Cathy, I think the issue at hand is that if you are seeing that you are losing lives, and then you've got a parliament, or should I say a national parliament, that cannot debate options, because this thing has to be gazetted before it can be implemented. And if it has to be gazetted, it means some people might be given an opportunity to say, what would you like? Why are they holding? Why can't they go to the public and say, this is what we would recommend? Then let the public decide. If the public decides to say, yes, we want this implemented, these devices implemented, so that they are able to intercept. The key thing here is about, I can't use the word bombs in the airport and all that, and not face the facts about the fact that we're not supposed to use that. Then it's going to reach a stage when people are inconversant, whatever they are doing, if it's aligned towards trying to do something somewhere, then the institution will be able to have access that there is a...
But Kolani, they have that already. They can do that already.
But the key thing, Cathy, the reason for the call is the fact that it's not being implemented. We are seeing people dying and dying. And now the issue at hand is that those who are either suspects, then if they are arrested, they've got more access to technology to continue doing the things they do, even if they are sitting behind bars. And that's the unfortunate part. If we don't expose those things, we're going to sit and complain, and yet the folks have the resources.
Okay.
Someone is holding them.
All right. Kolani out in the Eastern Cape, he says, let our crime intelligence make use of all of the technology that they have at their disposal to collect intelligence, but also to intercept, to prevent crime from taking place. He wants to see more evidence of that actually happening. We'll take a quick break. I'm back with more of your calls.
The giants of French rugby, Bordeaux Baclair and Clermont Auvergne, are fighting for a massive victory to cement top 5 positions. This is the top 14. Rugby, the French way. Catch the huge contest between Bordeaux Union Baclair and Clermont Auvergne on Sunday, 23 February at 10 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Up your February with great value deals from Vodacom Business. Get the new Samsung Galaxy A16 on a Red Business 1.5 gig plan for 379 Rand per month over 24 months. Enhance your deal. Add 29 Rand extra per month over 24 months and get the Samsung Galaxy Fit 3. Available in-store and online. T's and C's apply. Further together. Vodacom Business.
The whispers in the morning as I look in your...
This February, the month of love and self-care. At SAFM, we're celebrating with you, spreading love to all. Let's embrace kindness, connection, and self-care. And as always, SAFM will continue leading the conversations that move us through love, wellness, and everything in between. This month, let's love ourselves, love each other, and keep the conversation going. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
'Cause I'm your lady, and you are my man.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. It is your national roundtable. I'm taking your calls on 086 000 2032. Sean, you're in the Eastern Cape. Good morning.
Morning, Kim. How are you doing?
Good.
Okay, I want to talk about our budgetary constraints that apparently the minister lemonized with, for a lack of a better word. I don't know, but maybe we're missing it. We've got a constitutional dilemma here because our spending is directed by the Constitution. If we start from the top down, you sit and you look at the National Assembly and you've got 400 people sitting there, of which 95% of them smoking bubblegums and sitting on social media in the sittings. Why are we paying all these people? Why can that cabinet, that assembly not be halved? What's the real purpose of the NCOP? Because there's no laws they can pass that cannot go through through the National Assembly and the President. Why do we even have something called the NCOP? That's just to start with. The bloated cabinet has been overemphasized. It's just falling on deaf ears by the President. The National Assembly spends every year $1 million plus on a sauna that during the COVID era was proven can be done via the President's office. So there's all these things that we just obliterated with. Politicians that has worked for government services are getting state funerals. They can afford to bury themselves. There's all these expenses which people are then saying, but the Constitution allows it. So maybe we need to really revisit what the Constitution is directing us to pay, whilst we don't have money to pay it. Secondly, then look at where is the wastage. Why? I mean, for the life of me, I don't know the purpose of spokespeople. Because the President can talk. Why does he need a spokesperson? A minister can talk. A head of department can talk. But they've all got spokespersons. Mayors, they can talk. Why do you have spokespersons? Etc., etc., etc. So for us to sit in a financial dilemma and with loans, it doesn't make sense. We don't want to look at what we have instituted ourselves under the umbrella of democracy. And we don't realize we've actually incurred a serious financial burden on the fiscus of this country.
Yeah, look, Sean, I agree with you in the sense that there has to be a radical rethinking, right, of how we are spending our money. When it comes to roles in government, spokespeople, etc., well, those roles are important because, trust me, you would have more of a crisis when it comes to communication without some of those people in the positions that they are in, because that's when you really get to see how inept, some politicians are when it comes to communicating. So I would say keep the spokespeople by all means, but let's have a real look at how we are prioritizing our spending.
I mean, I've written on Twitter the other day, we forever having delegates going to attend this, that, and the other conferences. And for all the democratic years of presidents and cabinets traveling globally, our employment has just increased over all those years. Our crime has just increased. The health services has deteriorated. What is in the purposes of them going to these events?
Okay. Sean, I hear you loud and clear. Sean out in the Eastern Cape. I don't know if we fully grasp what the impact of these budget deficits is. Listen to what the MEC of the Northern Cape had to say and how he describes the problem. So if you can't hire temporary teachers, if you can't fill vacancies, then that means that a class that last year was sitting perhaps at a ratio of 40-1 suddenly doubles because of these gaps, and schools must make a plan. Or you're sitting with kids that aren't able to actually get a full school day when they are at school, because some of the periods where they would be getting a class on whatever subject, those are now empty. So they just sit around and play during that class time. We have to think, really, really more deeply about the implication of what these deficits means for the effective delivery of services. Sammy, in Cape Town, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to SFM listeners. I want to talk about the M23, roundabout M23 rebels and the mistake of the current DRC government. But before I talk about the current DRC government mistake, let me take you back into the history towards the Rwandan genocide. You would recall that when Rwandans were killing each other, the Hutus and the Tutsis, DRC opened arms and welcomed the Rwandan refugees into South Kivu, North Kivu, and Ituri province. So this is people that are paying the cost of generosity, because we welcome the refugees into these eastern DRC provinces, and now we're seeing what is happening with the security situation. But I want to ask you and South African listeners that are listening currently to go, if they can, they must read out the what you call it, the agreement M23. It was signed but on March 23, 2009. That is the agreement between the Congolese government and the Rwandan-backed M23 rebels. So if you read that document, it tells you what do they really want. These people want to be, as they are, rebels now. Whatever titles that they have into the rebellion, they want to be integrated into the Congolese army. So what kind of government that can accept things like that?
Okay.
So this is what Laurent Kabila accepted when he marched with the Rwandans to overthrow Mobutu. It is the same thing that Joseph Kabila accepted when in 2009 when they signed this agreement. But now, Felix Tshisekedi, the current president of the DRC, is refusing to repeat the same mistakes that his predecessors did. That is the actual mistake that the president has committed, because he's refusing to repeat the mistake of his predecessors.
All right,
and
Sammy.
that is what we are facing currently.
Thanks for that contribution. I'm going to stay in Cape Town. Janusz, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Thank you for taking my call. Cathy, it's not right that the Secretary of State, he said that he's not coming to South Africa because of this conflict of race, whatever. Actually,
and that session is taking place this week, hey, Janusz?
Yes, that's right. They all should come. They should come. They shouldn't. Okay, they're going to stay in expensive hotels, but they should ask the media. The media go into the areas like Kayalicha, Masipumalele, and see the truth how people live in here. Because this is not this information our government telling us. This information that we are a successful country, so and so. But you know, if they will go and have a look, I can take them, for instance, to Masipumalele and show them people. It doesn't matter of color, black, white, and white, color and white. They're living together in harmony. No, and but of course we got such a law which actually this not allow whites to be the same, have the same employment. But he must come. That this formation they're talking about it. It's not about the disformation. Show us the truth. How our people live, and expose ANC government what they say and what they're supposed to do. Because it's not what they're saying. It's a beautiful country for all the people.
Look, Janusz, I don't think that there's necessarily going to be any new discovery around the lived conditions and reality of South Africans. Those are available wherever you look. Look at Stats South Africa. Look at our Gini coefficient numbers, right? The ratio by which we have just moved up. Look at even the inequality rate of the country. There are no surprise findings there. So I don't know that taking him to Khayelitsha would necessarily reveal something that has not been revealed about South Africa. But it's about saying that with all of that information in place, can we be honest about its context? Which is the biggest problem here, is that, yes, there's information, but it's taken completely out of context. It's time for your latest news update.
In our top stories, appeal for motorists to be vigilant amid wet weather, and Trump speaks on efforts to end Ukraine war. Good morning. Johannesburg Metro Police have reiterated the call for motorists to remain vigilant after a fatal crash in Cresta, north of Johannesburg this morning. It's believed the motorist lost control of the vehicle along Republic Road in Columbine in Cresta and crashed into a tree. JMPD spokesperson Xolani Fihla.
The incident involved a single vehicle, a white Toyota Corolla with 2 occupants. Preliminary information indicates that the driver lost control of the vehicle due to the wet road surface and crashed into a tree. The male driver sustained fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene, and female passenger sustained serious injuries and has been transported to Helen Joseph Hospital. The scene is currently active with emergency services and JMPD officers working to clear the roadway. Motorists are advised to exercise caution while driving in the area.
2 suspects are expected to make their first appearance at the Brits Magistrates Court in the northwest for murder, kidnapping and rape. They allegedly kidnapped Lerato Mohlahlana on the 2nd of this month in Modderspruit. She had arrived at home with a boyfriend in the early hours of the morning when the incident happened. The suspects allegedly demanded a ransom from the family later that day for her safe return. However, Lerato's body was found later in a bush in the neighbouring Majakaneng. Northwest Police spokesperson Adele Myburg.
A thorough investigation by Mooinooi detectives, supported by Bojanala Sub-District 1 Crime Intelligence and Brits Trio Task Team, led to the identification and arrest of 2 suspects on Friday, the 14th of February. Police seized, amongst others, blood-stained clothes, a cell phone, bank card, and an identity document at the address of one of the suspects.
The Deputy Minister of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, Steve Litsike, has described the murder of Muhsin Hendricks as bias hate crime. Hendricks was an openly gay imam from Cape Town. The 58-year-old was killed in Gqeberha, the Eastern Cape, over the weekend. Litsike, who is also a member of the LGBTQ+ community, says this was not the first attack on his life. The Deputy Minister says the community isolated Hendricks because of his identity.
I think we shouldn't take away the fact that he was Muslim. He was practicing his Islamic faith. And for the fact that he was also even isolated by the Islamic community, and that is known, this is not a hidden fact. There has been fatwa that has been released in the past against him. He was attacked. His mosque was attacked before. You can realize that this bias act of attack subsequently was building up, and that for me shows an extreme intolerance in society, and that becomes a concern.
Employers across the country are urged to familiarize themselves with the new regulation regarding the minimum wage to ensure compliance. This after government announced a 4.4% increase from the 1st of next month. The Managing Director at Strategy Labour Solutions, Advocate Tertius Wessels, says although the amount may seem insignificant, it will have an impact on a number of small businesses.
This increase will undoubtedly have an impact on both employers and employees. Many employees, labour federations see this increase as minimal and almost as insignificant. But ultimately, there's also many small employers out there that really see this as something that's going to impact on their ability to remain operationally or financially sustainable.
And finally, the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has sought to assure both Ukraine and its European allies that they'll be involved in negotiations to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. NATO leaders in Europe have said any ceasefire agreed without them would lack credibility. Talks are expected to begin in Saudi Arabia this week, involving only U.S. and Russian officials. The U.S. President Donald Trump says he could meet the Russian President Vladimir Putin very soon, adding he believes that Putin wants to end the war.
I think he wants to stop fighting. I see that. We spoke long and hard. Steve Witkoff was with him for a very extended period, like about 3 hours. I think he wants to stop fighting. They have a big, powerful machine, you understand that. And they defeated Hitler and they defeated Napoleon. You know, they've been fighting a long time. They've done it before.
Recapping the top story, Johannesburg Metro Police have reiterated the call for motorists to remain vigilant after a fatal crash in Cresta, north of Johannesburg this morning. For SAFM News, I am Anne Musa.
across South Africa, online and on radio. SAFM, let's talk.
The Mangaung Metro Municipality is hosting an investment summit to bring investment to Bloemfontein. The summit will take place on 19 and 20 February at the City Hall and aims to bring together different economic role players from across the country and abroad. To be part of the summit or for more info, call 073 184 8972 or send an email to summit@mangaung.co.za. Mangaung, at the heart of it all.
Borussia Dortmund and FC Union Berlin are both searching for a decent position in the top half. They have a big battle for maximum points. This is the Bundesliga. Football as it's meant to be. Catch Borussia Dortmund FC versus FC Union Berlin on Saturday, 22 February at 7:30 p.m. Live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available at your fingertips on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
The Full Circle with Bridget Masinga.
It always doubles back to money for whatever reason. Like, I think all relationship and marital issues just come back to money. Okay, there'll be cheating here and there and other things. What are we not getting correct by way of those initial conversations?
It's a very big concern in any relationship, be it with a partner or family. So it is very important when you enter into a relationship is to disclose your finances, disclose your debt obligations, because as you have mentioned, most divorce rates is due to finances and one not being transparent with the other.
Samantha Moyane is a debt counselor.
The Full Circle, Monday to Friday, 1 to 3 p.m. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Welcome to the second hour of The Talking Point as we lead conversations that move us. It is 10 after 10 o'clock. Coming up in this hour, we're going to be looking at the new leadership of the African Union following the 38th ordinary session of heads of state and government that, of course, was responsible for installing this new leadership. The voting took place, and generally there seems to be a sense of excitement around then what the term for the new AU chairperson will entail. Of course, it comes in the midst of ongoing conflicts, different types that are manifesting themselves on the continent. And we'll look then at the role of this leadership, but also how do we ensure greater effectiveness of an organization such as the AU. And we'll have that conversation with a number of guests that we've lined up to contribute to it within the coming hour. Before we get to it, lots of your WhatsApp voice notes on different issues this morning. So we'll take a couple of those voice notes. It'll lead us into the 10 o'clock.
Morning, Cathy. I fully agree with Duma Kubula. Even that creating job based on waste management, I don't understand. I really don't understand where it's taking us as a country, where we will be specializing, our kids will be specializing to become specialists. Do we have the cell phone that is made in South Africa? Do we have a car? Do we have a bike? Do we have, what do we have actually? What do we have? Why government should focus on waste management in creating job, gardening programs? Cathy.
Hey, Cathy and SFM listeners. Anonymous here in Durban. I was listening to the interview in the morning with the gentleman who came online and was talking about jobs. It's pretty simple in South Africa. The government needs to scrap tenders firstly, because that is like a huge wastage. You know, there's middlemen, they're benefiting from this tendering system. Like, for example, I remember in the past where in Eskom, they were selling one roll of toilet paper for 80 Rand. Eh? Like, why can't we go back to the ways things were done before the tendering system was put into place? Even before tenders, our streets were clean, lights were working, we had running water. Okay, there was load shed. There was actually like almost no load shedding. You know, like why, like really? I don't understand like why politicians are more concerned about lining their pockets than the people of the country. You know, like something needs to be done. You know, it's completely unfair.
At times when you listen to people like the MSc for Education in the Northern Cape and the problems happening in different departments, you ask yourself, really, if the president of this country knows about these things, it's like these people are on their own. Everyone is doing his own thing in his own little corner. Everyone is stressed up about the budget and other problems. It's like there's no leadership in this country. If the president knows about these things, why doesn't he address all these problems? I mean, it's amazing what's happening in this country. Everything is failing on all fronts. The military, education, health, you mention it. It's so disgusting and very much frustrating. Matibang, thank you.
Hi, Cathy. Just bringing to your attention the illegal mining in the Meadowdale area between Edenvale and Germiston. We experience explosions every night and we are extremely concerned. The authorities have been notified but have yet to react. We are extremely concerned about our safety, our homes and offices. Anthony, Highway Gardens.
Let's get these chains in Mpumalanga. I heard that the students from university, they are protesting and they decided not to eat until they meet their demands. I don't know what are they really demanding or some sort, but to advise them, they must just start eating because our leaders are never paid attention to the youth. So I think they should eat because they will die of hunger. Please.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Well, the African Union has installed a new chairperson, Mohammed Ali Yusuf, who is Djibouti's Foreign Affairs Minister. It comes off the back of the 38th Ordinary Session of Heads of State and Government of the African Union that was held this past weekend. The summit itself coming at a time where the continent, of course, continues to face different conflicts. Here in South Africa, we've spoken a lot about the conflict in the DRC, but we still have conflict in Sudan, Mozambique, also still trying to settle disputed election results. There really are a number of issues depending on any region that you would want to focus on. The criticism leveled against the AU is often around its ineffectiveness or even seeming inability to deal with these challenges. Has the time for African solutions to African problems simply not delivered on that particular promise? Well, let's speak to some of those that work in the space. Dr. Adam Adebe is an expert in governance, comparative constitutional design, and a human rights and democratization in Africa specialist. He's a lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Dr. Adebe, good morning to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Good morning. The pleasure is all mine.
Ellen Ngari is an advocacy director for Africa at Human Rights Watch. Ellen, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Great to be on your show again. Looking forward to the discussions.
And later on this hour, we'll be joined by another guest from the Institute of Security Studies. So, Dr. Adebe, a new chairperson of the African Union. Of course, what we saw, if we're looking specifically from South Africa, we have welcomed this particular appointment. It is something that we supported. It was all smiles. And of course, there will always be a bit of contestation in terms of the position of AU chair. But one really begins to wonder, Dr. Adebe, that regardless of who the chairperson is, are we or do we necessarily see differences when it comes to the effectiveness of the organization? Or does this new person effectively take over to continue what was there before?
Thank you very much, Cathy. So you've jumped right into the core of the point. Obviously, individuals can make a difference. They are important, and I think individuals have a lot of agency. Institutional context, the history of the African Union, how it's designed. In particular, the fact that the commissioner effectively relies on the political will of the heads of states and governments, which only meet once, and from experience have been extremely disorganized often. Sometimes there is lack of political will, and even when there is a will, there's lack of resources, and implementation and coordination has always been a big challenge. And in fact, the outgoing commissioner, Moussa Faki, recently said that about more than 90% of the decisions of the African Union are actually not implemented. And of course, you also have a context where the African continent, unfortunately, has been regressing on some of the core objectives that it has laid out to itself in terms of development, in terms of integration, in terms of peace and stability, in terms of democratization and rule of law. In all of these, on all of these scores, unfortunately, the continent has been struggling, in particular in the past 5-10 years. And this coincides with a changing global context where countries across the world, from the United States to Russia to China and the European Union, seem to prefer a very transactional and at best bilateral rather than multilateral engagement. And so, yes, I think the new person would have to come in and they will have a lot of agency. And we will see, whether somebody from a small country like Djibouti will be able to pull the weight of more than 50 countries to bring them together, to set a shared agenda, to pursue that agenda, and speak in one voice within the continent on conflicts and democratization issues and climate and all that happen within the continent, but also on issues that matter to the continent in global forums. And so, yes, agency matters, but the context is going to be very challenging for the newcomer.
You raise an important issue around what the shared agenda of the African Union is. We know what it is on paper, right? We know what it is that they have written down to sort of say this is the mission statement, this is where we're going, Agenda 2063, effectively. But there is this great disconnect between what the continent says it wants to see, it wants to do, versus what is actually happening in individual countries. Where do you think the weakening of the AU has stemmed from? Because if one takes a look at maybe 15 years ago, there certainly seemed to be a greater energy around the organization and the sense that, in fact, Africa can solve its own problems. Today, not so much.
Absolutely. I think I don't want to be pessimistic. I think the African Union has been a net positive for the continent. They're on areas such as climate, and we'll see how it will unfold, but on issues around reparation, on public debt, at least it has managed to bring Africans together to speak in a united voice. And as I said, there are implementation challenges. But you're also right to say that the enthusiasm, the energy that accompanied the transformation of the Organization of African Unity into the African Union, we've not been able to sustain it. Faces like Muammar Gaddafi, despite some of the terrible records domestically in terms of human rights, forces like Thabo Mbeki, forces like Olusegun Obasanjo. Unfortunately, I think we have not been able to see the kind of leadership, the kind of commitment to the African cause, and an open attempt to pursue some of the objectives. And then, of course, I think ultimately for me, what matters is that as a continent, we have to be united around certain basic principles. And my sense is that it's very difficult to have a union of dictators. I think as a continent, unless we manage to improve the democratic discourse at home, I find it very extremely difficult for the continent to come together, because I think individuals, leaders who are not used to constraints on their power, who are not used to respecting the rule of law, fundamental ideas of constitutionalism, will find it very, very difficult to accept rules and directions that come from the African Union level. And so I think we need leadership, particularly from the big, powerful countries like South Africa, like Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, Nigeria, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Egypt from North Africa. I think we need a powerful coalition of the willing, a few powerful countries that need to sit together, outline a shared agenda, and pursue it. And this is particularly urgent, as I said in the beginning, in a context where the world is changing. If you look at South Africa, Donald Trump essentially is trying to bully the country into accepting some of their ridiculous demands. And unfortunately, South Africa as a country, despite its proud history and despite its capabilities, is going to find it difficult to challenge the pressure from the Americans. And so we need South Africa to mobilize the African continent so that they can speak with one voice. And so I think there's need for leadership. And at the same time, we also need to make sure that we create the conditions at the domestic level that make rule of law, that make commitment, respect for commitment, constitutionalism as the foundations of our leadership. And so unless I think we have that combination of leadership, and I mean consistent leadership from a country, it shouldn't be aligned to a particular person. It has to be a fundamental part of the foreign policies of a few countries that have plans, that have visions for the continent, and that consistently pursue that. Until we kind of get that kind of country leadership and not individual leadership, and that then enables a sense of development, of democratization, and respect for the rule of law at the domestic level, we're going to find it very difficult. We're making progress. I think that the most important progress in the past few years has been the entry into force of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And it's moving slow, but there's a steady movement. There's a steady progress, but I think taking it to the next level will require a sense of leadership and commitment to fundamental principles.
Alan, this idea of having common values, right? Human rights perhaps is a good tenet to sort of focus that on. And again, it's about what countries commit to versus what is actually happening in their countries. So if Adam says that the AU has been a net positive for the continent, has that also resulted in better respect of human rights across the continent?
Cathy, unfortunately, the answer to that is no. We have actually seen a deepening of human rights crisis across the continent. We are now dealing with very many situations where we urgently need the action of the African Union. This action has been slow, to put it quite bluntly. And it's true that political will is really the greatest mover of what, to resolve some of these issues. And we have not been seeing this, being galvanized at the African Union level. Indeed, there have been a number of discussions, including this past Friday, on both the Eastern DRC situation as well as Sudan. And, what we haven't seen the communique yet. It is not out of the Peace and Security Council, which met at the heads of states and government level. But what we expect from what we have heard from the commissioner in charge of political affairs, peace and security, Ambassador Bankole, and just to say that he was re-elected back to his position on Wednesday last week, which is somewhat a breath of fresh air for us, in the sense that you have a new chairperson in the person of Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, but you actually do need some form of continuity, and the leadership of Ambassador Bankole has been quite instrumental. But the point is that we actually do need the political will of the main actors at the Peace and Security Council, the states themselves, in order for us to move the needle towards a continent where citizens can really enjoy and have their human rights protected.
In as much as the issue around sovereignty, right, is one that we have to understand and respect when it comes to the positions or even the actions of individual countries, one very much gets the sense that it has also been used as an excuse to not call out wrongdoing, to not be the bad guy. The AU often feels like it doesn't want to be the bad guy by calling out some of the human rights abuses that are taking place. And it goes down also to individual member states. Dr. Adebe speaks about how we should avoid a situation of it being a coalition of dictators, right? Where dictators come together and they enjoy nice lunches and suppers and talk about what is happening in their countries and move on as if there's nothing wrong with the state of affairs. Do you think that there is a culture in the AU to undo part of that there is an appetite to start saying, actually, where we see something wrong, we need to start calling it out a bit more aggressively?
Yes, so perhaps the point of departure in responding to your question is the framework of the Constitutive Act that established the African Union itself, which is quite clear in one of the articles, in Article 4H specifically. It gives the AU the right to intervene in a member state to prevent serious human rights violations. And this is a really powerful provision. And, we would require the Peace and Security Council to recommend an intervention. But we have seen little use of this important provision within the AU Constitutive Act, and especially on the ongoing crisis in Sudan, which, since April 2023, we've had this conflict in Sudan. And now we are seeing the Eastern DRC in the situation that it is in. Previously, we were saying that we need an intervention in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, but also the Sahel, which continues to be a hotbed of very many rights abuses, both by governments and armed actors.
Alan?
Yes.
Sorry to cut you off there. I'm going to pause you. I'll give you an opportunity to continue on the other side of the 10:30 news headlines.
Thank you, Cathy. In the news headlines on SAFM, I am on Delambana, and a very good morning. Advocacy group My Vote Counts is challenging the Political Funding Act in the Western Cape High Court today. The organisation claims the act falls short of its constitutional goals of transparency, openness and accountability. Johannesburg Metro Police have reiterated the call for motorists to remain vigilant after motorists lost their life in a fatal crash in Cresta, north of Johannesburg this morning. And the M23 rebel group has called on the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo to engage in a dialogue to address the crisis in the country. The group has been engaged in a fierce battle with the DRC army. And full update follows at the top of the hour.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 18 Rand 40 to the dollar, 23 Rand 17 to the pound and 19 Rand 28 to the euro. Markets in Asia were mainly higher at the closing bell. The JSE mixed in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are also mixed. Gold is trading at $2,900, platinum at $985 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $74.77 a barrel.
Do great solutions start with good conversation? SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
Jazz lovers, the wait is over. Africa's grandest gathering returns on the 25th to the 26th of April at the Cape Town International Convention Center. Experience 2 nights of soul-stirring jazz, electrifying collaborations, and over 30 world-class artists across 4 iconic stages. Don't miss this unforgettable musical experience. Get your tickets now at ticketmaster.co.za. Brought to you by Independent Media, proud media partner of the Cape Town International Jazz Festival.
S3 and Lorna Maseko are adding flavor to your Wednesday evenings. Lorna invites you on a journey of discovering new ways of transforming South African pantry staples into delectable and budget-friendly meals. From reimagining traditional South African dishes to infusing global inspirations, Lorna's inventive recipes and seasoned cooking tips inspire creativity and will empower viewers to navigate the kitchen with savvy resourcefulness. Tune into Lorna's Pantry, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. only on S3. Open up.
The National Pulse, weekdays 3 to 6 p.m.
Can you tell us more about the circumstances that led to the inmate escaping?
It is still a scene which is active in terms of the investigations that we are conducting. But what I can share with you and the listeners is that this inmate was part of a SPEN, in simple English, a work team that was allocated to work within the grounds of the facility. So, and he was also allocated to status of being a monitor. So for an inmate to get to that particular level, it means that someone who has worked hard and managed to be given some degree of responsibility.
Singabako Numano is the Department of Correctional Services spokesperson.
You're listening to the National Pulse on SAFM. Missed it? Find the podcast at safm.co.za. Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
All right, we continue the conversation on the talking point. We're looking at the African Union and how do we get more effectiveness out of this particular regional organization. Dr. Adam Adebe is with the University of Pretoria, and Ellen Ngari is Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch. So, Ellen, you, of course, were still speaking to us. The question I had asked had been around the intentional calling out of human rights abuses where they happen, that we're not actually seeing that from the African Union. Often there seems to be a culture of either ignoring or, where it is not ignored, kick the can down the road as far as possible. And eventually when we do say something, it's not clear in terms of what exactly the issues or the circumstances that led to a particular problem are.
Absolutely. You're right, Cathy, in every one of the points that you have mentioned there. And I'll go back to the situation in Sudan and just the failure to call out the very serious human rights violations that are going on there at the African Union level. We have been saying as Human Rights Watch that the killing of the Masalit in Darfur amounts to ethnic cleansing, and there has been several reports and several analysis that have been done to the situation. Ultimately, a finding of genocide, a determination of genocide by the U.S. government earlier or late last year. And to date, we have yet to see the African Union make such a determination, which would then mean that it could make a stronger intervention. I was talking about the Article 4H of the Constitutive Act that established the AU, that gives it the right to intervene where cases of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity have happened. But we have not seen that. It doesn't mean that the AU does not act. It doesn't mean that it is not involved in the situation. Far from that. In fact, there have been quite a number of decisions related to Sudan, related to Eastern DRC of late, but we just need some more action in terms of beyond just statements of condemnation. We actually need tangible steps on how to move things forward. And one of those tangible steps, I would say, for the Eastern DRC is a fact-finding mission. We actually do need one. So then there was a meeting earlier in the month asking for an intervention in terms of an investigative mechanism. But, we expected to see the Friday meeting of heads of state on the Eastern DRC then culminate to the next steps. And those next steps would be for the incoming chairperson, who unfortunately has inherited an inbox full of human rights crisis in the continent that he would have to deal with. And that would mean for Sudan, for more action towards accountability, and for Eastern DRC, definitely a fact-finding mission to investigate the human rights situation. But I think your point was the failure of the AU to call out its own member states for serious violations. And, we saw the report of the UN group of experts on the DRC last December make a very clear point that the M23 in the DRC are being backed by the Rwandan Defense Forces. But all the meetings of the African Union, but beyond even the African Union, even the SADC meeting of heads of state and the earlier meeting of the East African Community, all of which form part and parcel of the arsenal of the African Union, failed to mention Rwanda in the midst of the conflict in the east of the DRC.
Adam, there's often this notion that democracy in its, how can I phrase this? Democracy in the way that we have understood it as quote unquote imported from the West does not work for African countries, and that we need a quote unquote African type of democracy. When you look at the nature in which democracy has unfolded on the continent, and to some extent the use of the term and elections being held being used almost as a tool to tick that we have held elections, but not have it be a true exercise of, number one, the freedom of the vote, but also things like freedom of expression, freedom of association, which are embedded tenets within what we use to describe or even to assess what democracy is. Is there an argument to be made about a democracy that is specific to Africa? And what is often hidden in this need for an African type of democracy? What is really being asked for there?
This is a question that the continent has been struggling with from the days of independence. I think if you look at what happened a few years after most of African countries became independent, they kind of inherited, if you look at the constitutional framework of Ghana, for instance, or Senegal, they were, in the case of what is called Anglophone Africa, they were actually adopted as acts of the British Parliament. And in the case of France, very similar. They were not adopted as acts of the French Parliament, but there was, to put it mildly, a lot of inspiration, a lot of copy pasting, and the subsequent leaders essentially discarded this and adopted what they thought was an African way of governing, which at the time was seen as requiring a sense of urgency that the kind of democracy that was copied from the West was not able to deliver. And the same thing happened in the 90s when all these military dictatorships and one-party systems collapsed. The same conversations happened, and in fact, one of the first declarations of the Organization of African Unity in the early 90s was to say, yes, we need democracy, But we need a democracy that reflects our realities. It's essentially saying we should not copy-paste. But what happened ultimately, partly under pressure from domestic forces, civil society, the opposition wanted sort of a liberal form of democracy, but partly because of pressure from the World Bank and the IMF and the winners of the Cold War, we kind of reverted to the independence, constitutional and political framework. Now, I think the key question for me is that as Africans, we need to focus on what is legitimate, right? I think democracy is a form of establishing a legitimate form of government. And so we need to start thinking about, okay, as a continent, the most important thing for me, whether democracy or legitimate government, is founded on the idea that government should be based on the consent of the people. And I think people want a system that is accountable, a system that is responsive, and a system that allows them to express themselves. Essentially, a system that is founded on rule of law and fundamental rights. But in terms of, for instance, the way we rely on elections and how electoral outcomes are translated into power, and I think that has been a very, very dangerous framework in the sense that the electoral system has led to a political situation where the winner takes it all. So whoever wins takes everything. And in particular in the African context where the bureaucracy, the civil service is not really autonomous from the political institutions. What it means is that winning elections means you have control over the procurement process. You have control over the appointment of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of employees. And so to win and to lose has significant consequences. And so I think as Africans, we need to imagine our political framework such that the electoral process and the political framework does not lead to a winner-takes-all politics. Because if you have a winner-takes-all politics, what will happen is what we see in Mozambique. The opposition will reject outcomes and the incumbents will always claim victory. And we see this across the continent. And of course, there are a few bright spots like Botswana, South Africa, and despite the struggles in Nigeria and Senegal, but large parts of the continent are still stuck in that spiral of winner-takes-all politics. And I think if we have to Africanize it, Africanize our politics, it's really addressing that aspect, because historically our politics was founded around shared decision-making, deliberative decision-making, and inclusive decision-making. And so I think from that perspective, and I would perhaps say the experiment in South Africa now, perhaps South Africans are not used to it yet, and it's still something that has to prove itself. But a form of government that actually rewards everyone according to their political strengths, rather than empowers and excludes another, is certainly something to consider. So it's essentially, in summary, the fundamentals of the system, such as freedoms and rule of law, I think that is important. That you cannot have a legitimate government that is not founded based on the consent of the people. But in terms of how we translate voices, public support, public consent into power, I think there's a lot that needs to be worked out there.
Democracy without elections? Is that still democracy?
Well, no, it doesn't have to be without elections. And it's very important, by the way, that historically it was not always associated with elections. Elections are just an efficient way of determining who has more support than others. And so, you can, for instance, imagine a system where the leaders are selected through a lottery. That's possible. And it will still be legitimate. It's based on the consent of the people. And so elections are, are important, and we've gotten used to them. But the point I was trying to make was not that we need to get rid of elections, but that how the electoral support. So, if a party gets 40% or 60%, should they get 100% of the power? I think so. We can't, even if we maintain elections, we need to start rethinking how we translate the electoral support into public power. I think there is a point to make, but again, it's also possible to reconsider whether we should also think about other legitimate. The important thing is it has to be legitimate, and it has to be a means of expressing consent of the people. So, but it does not necessarily have to be elections. But even if we resort to elections, there's still a lot that can be done, particularly in terms of how we translate electoral support into public power.
All right, fair enough. I hear you loud and clear, Adam, in terms of the point that you're making. I want to bring in some of the contributions of our listeners. I'm going to start with the voice notes that they've sent through before I bring in the calls on the call line.
Hi, Cathy. I agree with you. Democracy is an imported thing, and it's meant for it's made for Africa, not meant for Africa. We actually need to sit down as Africa and actually say, okay, what works better for us? Because the problem is, because of our perceived backwardness in terms of the technology and civilization and everything is just copy and pasted from Europe into Africa, and that's creating a problem. You see, in a variety of ways, including our justice system. You see, it's all imported. So we need something that works for Africa. And thank you very much.
Good morning, Cathy and the listeners. I just want to ask your guest there to say, is Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso a dictator? That's what I want to know. Secondly, the countries like the Sudan, South Sudan, DR Congo, Mozambique, Central African Republic, all those countries, you see a lot of weaponry in those countries, ammunition and what have you. In Africa, we do not have a country that is producing and making ammunitions. Where do we get these ammunitions to infiltrate the so-called poor countries and the countries embedded with a conflict? You see, we are just scratching the surface here. The problem is deeper than what we are analyzing.
Good morning. Bishop Makwana from Leboa Home Zone. And for look, Cathy, they said we must leave African problems to African solutions. The African solution for us is criminals, thieves, and comprador bourgeoisies who are sitting at the helm, working together to loot the resources of their own countries. So AU is useless and futile. We need a new body that can be binding, that is not consist of presidents. Because you look at SADC, even the president itself.
Hi, Cathy. I'm late to the discussion, but it's very, very important. I just would like to find out from your guests, as part of reimagining governance as Africans continentally, and also reimagining what democracy means to us as Africans, where is the push? How far is the push to have the United Nations headquarters moved from New York to the African continent, or, from North America, basically? How far is that? And would that then have in any way any kind of contribution towards reimagining what democracy means when the seat of international democratic rule is moved from the West? Thank you, Meta.
Are we ready for a real conversation? SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
Ever since Uspilion won 5,000 rand, 5 hour on Wheel of Fortune, he only wears white push-in sandals. Star white, Baba. And he owns 10 identical pairs. Before he did not even know the Queen's language. Now, Kalabo, wow. Chance. Let's watch Wheel of Fortune weekdays, Monday to Friday at 7:30 on S3, and see how one spin changed Spillion's life and how it can change ours as well. in just one day.
The thirst to play the beautiful game is too high in the Banyana camp as they get ready to face Lesotho this weekend. Desiree Ellis Girls will be playing their first match of 2020 against Southern African neighbors in an international friendly at Tsakane Stadium. There will be no love shared amongst neighbors on the field of play. Show your love for Banyana. Tune in live to SABC 1 and your favorite SABC radio station this Sunday at 3 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on the Talking Point, looking at the African Union and really where are the gaps, right? How can we improve the effectiveness of this regional body and the role of leadership in being able to drive that? You've already heard some of the contributions from our listeners. I'll give our guests an opportunity to come in. Alan, let me begin with you, or maybe actually let me do this before I let you come in. Let me go to Gqeberha Michaels. Good morning to you.
Morning, Katie. Quick one. Why are we so fixated on this thing called democracy, right? As some holy grail or sacred instrument. When the same people that enslaved, colonized us, also then gave us this thing called democracy. I just want to know if anyone can mention one country in Africa where democracy has elevated the masses out of poverty. That's just my question.
All right. Thanks for that question. Simpiwe and Ramsur, good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Cathy. Good morning to your guest and to the listeners. Look, I think the point that I wanted to come on, Cathy, is the issue of this democracy that we speak about. Even the suggestion now that perhaps democracy can still be democracy without elections. I want to disagree with that, vehemently, because one of the reasons why we have these problems that we have on the African continent is because we haven't decided as Africans on who can lead us and on what basis must that person lead us. Now, if you look at the current crop of leaders, leadership in the African Union, look at how some of them got to become leaders in the first place. Now, if they must then sit and decide and agree on the principles of democracy, it's very clear to me at least that some of them are always afraid that they will be left out, and they will not pass the test on democracy. That's the first point. But the second point is that I wonder sometimes if there is even commonness and common purpose in what these leaders have to agree on, because one of the issues on the African continent is parity and equality. Now, it's a fact that not all countries are the same. And now, if there is an issue on the agenda that, for instance, there needs to be a borderless Africa. I'm picking an example because I heard a leader say that. Now, if there has to be an issue on borderless Africa, it's bound that there will be disagreements. And that's where I feel African leaders then lose each other. And you then have a situation where even on common things that should work for us, but because I've disagreed with you on that point, on that one point, I can't then, the other leader can't agree with the other one on the other point. And I think that is throwing us back as Africa. You don't necessarily need a new AU. But what you need is you need an Elon Musk, if I have to say that, in Africa, who's just going to repurpose this thing, because we love our leaders, but no. Now we need change.
Okay, thank you for that contribution, Piwe. Ellen, let me give you a chance to come in, respond to some of the questions our listeners have also posed.
Thanks, Cathy, and to your listeners as well. I think the common thread for me, from what I've heard from your listeners, is around the legitimacy around democracy. And, they are right to question the notion of democracy as we see it on the African continent, whether it's in institutions like the African Union, ECOWAS, SADC, East African Community, or even just individual African states. Our leaders are allergic to accountability, and this is really the main problem. When we talk about democracy, the one very important component to it and the rule of law is accountability. But we don't see accountability for serious human rights violations going on in the continent, whether it's civil and political rights, whether it's during elections, all of which are quite important. And we've seen in the most recent past in SADC a number of countries experiencing electoral concerns and issues. But this all goes to the fact that accountability doesn't exist. The leaders themselves do not call each other out. I made mention of Eastern DRC, not a single mention of a country that is backing a rebel movement. For the continent itself, I think one of your listeners was quite right in saying that a lot of the weapons come from outside of the continent. And Human Rights Watch, together with various other organizations, have mapped and seen where these weapons are coming from. They're coming from countries such as the UAE, they're coming from countries such as Russia, such as Turkey. So we are not calling, if we are unable as a continent to call each other out on accountability, it becomes impossible then for these leaders to call out others outside. So I really like the question around, what are we doing in terms of centering democracy in Africa through multilateral institutions such as the United Nations. And, this year, what happened last week at the AU is the heads of state spoke about justice for Africans and people of Africans' descent through reparations. And it's an important topic for us as Africans. And unless we are able to look at the question of accountability internally on ourselves, it would be very difficult to then call out for accountability for those other countries outside of the African continent responsible for all the malaise that we are seeing on the continent, both now, but during the colonial periods. And I think this issue of accountability is the missing puzzle in African governance.
Adam?
That's right. I think what we see essentially is I think there's two things. First is that I don't think it's fair to say that democracy was imposed on us. I think African people want a legitimate government, as people are anywhere. And democracy in the West was it's not their heritage. It was something that developed within a historical context. It's quite new, even for the West, right? It's less than 200 years in the format that we understand it today. And so it's not fair to attribute the idea of democracy to the West. I think. But what is important, one, is that we need a legitimate form of government, and I think a democratic government is a legitimate government, and that's one. And secondly, we need to make sure that democracy delivers. I think some of the challenge, and I think that's what Alan has been trying to say, is that even in copying, we've not done it well, right? And so we have copied the stuff that works for the powerful. And not the fact, the democratic aspects that actually empower everybody, that deliver the basic services to everybody. And so our job really, I think, as Africans is to imagine how best to design our political institutions so that, one, they are legitimate, because if they are not legitimate, they will lead to conflict. And secondly, that they are effective. And that requires, I think, continuous engagement around the issues some of the listeners have raised.
All right. Let me thank you all for your contributions to this conversation this morning. Dr. Adam Adebe, he's an expert in democratization and comparative constitutional design. He's with the University of Pretoria, and Alan Ngari, Advocacy Director for Africa at Human Rights Watch. It's time for your latest news update.
Thank you, Cathy. Top stories at 11. My Vote Counts challenges Political Funding Act, and Joburg motorists called on to be vigilant as rainy weather persists. For SAFM News, I am Ondelambana, and a very good morning. Advocacy group My Vote Counts is challenging the Political Funding Act in the Western Cape High Court today. The organisation claims the act falls short of its constitutional goals of transparency, openness and accountability. My Vote Counts is objecting to provisions that allow donations below 100,000 rand to remain undisclosed. Its senior researcher, Joel Bragman, says the transparency of such information will help people to vote for an informed position.
We are saying that the limits, the 100,000 rand and then the 15 million rand, we are saying that they are unjustifiably high and that we need to have them lowered. We are asking for 7 things specifically. We are saying that all donations should be disclosed regardless of the amount, and we are asking the court to direct Parliament to rework this number. We also then speak about cumulative donations that we just spoke about, needed to be regulated and limited. We also speak about expenditure as an important part of the calculus. So for public funding, parties have to report on how they spend their funds.
The body of an illegal miner has been retrieved from a disused Zwartkrans gold mine in Mokopane, Limpopo. Police say the body was buried under large rocks in the shaft. Police spokesperson Malisela Lidwaba says an inquest docket has been opened.
The retrieval operation, which included SAPS, EMS and Malakwena Mining Company, commenced the following day using relevant equipment and other resources. Body believed to be that of a Lesotho national already in a state of decomposition was successfully retrieved.
Johannesburg Metro Police have reiterated the call for motorists to remain vigilant after motorists lost their life in a fatal crash in Cresta, north of Johannesburg this morning. It's believed the motorist lost control of the vehicle along the Republic Road in Kolumani in Cresta and crashed into a tree. JMPD spokesperson Xolani Fihla.
The incident involved a single vehicle, a white Toyota Corolla with 2 occupants. Preliminary information indicates that the driver lost control of the vehicle due to the wet road surface and crashed into a tree. The male driver sustained fatal injuries and was pronounced dead at the scene, and female passenger sustained serious injuries and has been transported to Helen Joseph Hospital. The scene is currently active with emergency services and JMPD officers working to clear the roadway. Motorists are advised to exercise caution while driving in the area.
Some parts of the R524 road between Louis Trichardt and Thohoyandou in Limpopo have been washed away, making it impassable due to localized flooding. Motorists say they are now forced to use long detours. Several roads in the Thohoyandou, Malamulele and Giani areas have been damaged. Low-lying bridges were also washed away. Roads authorities are still making assessments on the damages. A motorist, Anza Negota, has expressed concern, saying the situation needs attention.
It's a very difficult situation for a person like me who drives between Chakuma and Thohoyandou every single day to get to work. It becomes very difficult. Now, every time you need to be looking at the tires if they're not damaged. That road is badly damaged. We now have to be driving on gravel road in order to pass, because where there used to be tar road, it's just potholes all over.
The M23 rebel group has called on the government of Democratic Republic of Congo to engage in a dialogue to address the crisis in the country. The group has been engaged in a fierce battle with the DRC army. Bonolo Maribe reports.
In a statement, the M23 rebel group has reached out to Kinshasa government to engage in a dialogue that would lead to lasting peace in the DRC. The group has since captured several towns in the country. DRC government has relied on SADC and MONUSCO peacemakers to bring stability in the country. South Africa has lost 14 soldiers who were in a peacemaking mission in the DRC. SADC and the East African community at their recent joint meeting also called for a political dialogue to resolve the impasse in the DRC. Bonolo Maribe, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Recovering the top story, advocacy group My Vote Counts is challenging the Political Funding Act in the Western Cape High Court today. The organisation claims the act falls short of its constitutional goals of transparency, openness and accountability. I am Ondelambana for SAFM News Headlines at 11:30.
SAFM. Prime time all day long. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Hi, good morning, Cathy. Errol here from Durban. Look, I've said this before and I'll say it again. African leaders, including South Africa, have only got themselves to blame through lack of funding from America. Because most of those funds land up in the back pockets of corrupt officials and leaders and does not go to where it's intended to go, to help the poor. So, until they get their act together, they will suffer from lack of funding. Errol, Durban.
Siskati, hi. Wow, this is JCK Kaunda from Sina. Siskati, I don't see a purpose of AU, African Union, or do you see any? AU is failing to resolve the socio-economic challenges of Africa or member states. AU should have addressed the diaspora and prevent illegal flooding of immigrants into other countries. That is the duty and obligation of AU. But they are just there to represent their selfish intentions. Let me rest my case for now. JCK, Kaunda from Sina.
Good morning, Cathy. It's Mr. Suleiman. Cathy, the AU has been there for time immemorial. I think I've learnt about them in our history books. And you can see through the years why they haven't succeeded is because of fraud and corruption. We need to remove fraud and corrupt leaders who make the country puppet states. Otherwise, Africa will never succeed. We will be always going with a begging bowl, although we have everything. Thank you.
And then, how? SK, where are you going with that stuff?
My dog. I'm going whale watching. New hobby, you see. Finally going out to explore the world. Giri levels, Ntwana.
I see the life jacket, but I don't know how an inflatable boat, megaphone, and a fishing rod fits into all of this.
How else am I going to get to the whales, bongs? I need the boat. The megaphone is to do my whale calls, and the fishing rod is called ambience. Ambience. If you don't get it, forget about it.
Okay, but SK, you know there aren't any whales here in Germiston Lake.
Ooh, Shem, Mr. Know-it-all. Whales live in the water, and Germiston Lake has water.
Hi, sure, Ntwana, go whale watching in Germiston Lake. Me, I'll tune into Whale with Steve Buckshall, Sundays at 5 p.m. only on S3.
S3. The whispers in the morning as I look in your
This February, the month of love and self-care. At SAFM, we're celebrating with you, spreading love to all. Let's embrace kindness, connection, and self-care. And as always, SAFM will continue leading the conversations that move us through love, wellness, and everything in between. This month, let's love ourselves, love each other, and keep the conversation going. SAFM, leading the conversations that move us.
'Cause I'm your lady and you are my man.
All right, let's talk TV licenses. Did you know that paying your TV license isn't just about legalities? It helps fund local productions and creates jobs in the entertainment industry. That means more epic dramas, exciting sports and news that keeps us informed. So, when was the last time you checked yours? Visit www.tvlic.co.za and make sure you're up to date. After all, it's your screen, your story. Hashtag your screen, your story.
Cathy Mohlahlana on SAFM.
We continue the conversation on the talking point. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show, 11 after 11 o'clock. And today then we're focusing for this hour on academics, international organizations, and the subject of tax justice and solidarity. Just this past month, international government organizations, economists, and former heads of state and the clergy held a high-level dialogue just under this theme. The event taking place at a critical moment, right, when the ultra-rich in power are shaping political decisions and also trying to undermine international cooperation for tax reform. These discussions focused on a number of areas, including the role of taxation of multinational corporations and the super rich in reducing inequality, combating climate change, and financing sustainable development. Our next guest is somebody who was one of the speakers for this conference, certainly no stranger to many South Africans, Executive Director of the Institute for Economic Justice, Dr. Gillard Isaacs. Dr. Isaacs, good morning to you. Thanks for your time this morning.
Morning. Thanks very much for the invite.
Alejandro Rodriguez Lash is the head of advocacy at the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation. Alejandro, good morning to you. Thanks for your time.
Good morning, Cathy, and thank you for having me in your show.
Perhaps let me begin with you, Alejandro, because you, of course, were part of the organizing committee, right? You have created this platform. What exactly did you have in mind in terms of what you were wanting to address and what you hoped to achieve?
Well, Cathy, as you were mentioning, this high-level dialogue was centered on tax justice and solidarity, and I think that it is a crucial moment for having this. A secret, we think that we are facing a global problem that is international tax evasion by multinational corporations and the super rich because of the international tax rules that we have in place today. So as we think this is a global problem, we need a global solution of these problems. The same as climate change, global tax evasion needs of international cooperations between countries for achieve effective solutions to this problem. But in recent months and years, we have been seeing an attack on multilateralism, and this is very worrying at a tipping point of international tax cooperation, where we see processes going forward and where we're seeing solutions more closer. So the idea that we had in organizing this event was to gather global leaders from governments, former prime minister, former presidents, the church, but also global renowned academics and civil society to discuss these issues, to discuss which are the solutions, how we can create critical mass to fight these attacks on multilateralism and to fight the extreme concentration of power that extreme concentration of wealth has created and that is undermining our democracies as we speak. So for us, this was very important to gather all these influential voices and to send a clear message. We need a global solution for a global problem, and it is not time to set back.
Gillard, if one listens to what Alejandro is saying and we take out of it the global context, you could just sort of copy-paste the ideas into South Africa and they would still apply, right? In as far as the questions around the extent to which there is this acknowledgement of the need for tax reform, the role of the ultra-rich in our society, and the impact that plays, I think, to South Africans more broadly. This week we're going to have our budget speech. We'll be told about how, we've got a very small tax base in this country, simply unable to continue funding the needs of the country. In the same breath, we'll also be told that increasing wealth taxes is not an option, increasing corporate taxes is not an option. So maybe from your perspective, right, where do we sit as a country in as far as tax compliance of these particular groups that we're looking at is concerned? And is the conversation that we're having in line perhaps with what the rest of the world is talking about?
Absolutely. Thanks, Cathy. So I think what your question gets at is for us to just drill down a bit into the ways in which we are losing a tax revenue, and these groups are undertaxed. And South Africa is unfortunately suffering in the same way as our global peers. So if you look on the side of corporate tax, for instance, what we have are various schemes to try and to declare income by large multinationals in tax havens abroad. What we have is various ways of sifting profits to show that the activities are taking place in the Cayman Islands or elsewhere. And what we have is the under taxation of digital services, and all of those profits also being attributed to entities based outside of South Africa. And we have all of those problems in South Africa. One sort of famous instance was we saw after the Marikana massacre, that Lonman, the firm implicated there, had been undertaking this type of misinvoicing to and under reporting on its sales in a way which increased profits of an overseas arm of the company and undervalued those profits here. And this always is visible once corporate malfeasance is exposed. So South Africa is certainly subject to the same type of illicit financial flows, tax avoidance, and sometimes legal tax planning, which means that we receive less income than we should. The same is true for ultra-high net worth individuals. What we see internationally is that these individuals actually pay often a lower level of personal income tax than you or I or others. And that's because a lot of their income is derived not from wage income, from a salary, but it comes from owning wealth.
When it comes to the contribution that you were making to this particular session, Gillard, what in particular were you saying around how it is that you believe we can start to fix some of these problems? Of course, the gathering itself aims to ensure that the international tax system is overhauled, right? And to try and find and have mechanisms that are embedded, that the UN perhaps can adopt, that will force, or at least that will require for those countries that would ratify it, that would require some level of implementation. But we're not there yet. So what were you proposing as potential solutions?
One of the arenas where this conversation is underway at the moment is at the G20, which South Africa holds the presidency of this year. Last year there was a significant focus under the Brazilian leadership on the need to tax the super rich, in particular those, as I was saying, whose income derives from holding wealth. And we were calling on and supporting and encouraging the South African authorities, in particular the National Treasury, which leads what's known as the finance track, which is sort of half of the G20 negotiations, and focuses on these issues to ensure and to advance the conversation. Unfortunately, there's been quite a lot of reticence by the South African National Treasury to really take a ambitious position and to make this a centerpiece of South Africa's presidency.
Alejandro, the particular connection that you make here is that taxation has a direct impact on democracy, in fact, on the very survival of democracy. Unpack that a little bit for us and why we need to see tax reform as a way of protecting democracy.
Well, Cathy, there are different points on entry points on this analysis. On one hand, taxation gives us the opportunity to finance public goods, to finance public services, to finance social security that for everyone. So we have a safety net of different to guarantee our rights. Without taxations, governments will not have enough resources to finance these very important services and goods for the most vulnerable. So this is very important. And one of the things that we've seen today is an attack on the very role of the at the role of the government. So taxation is very important for this. But also, when you see how the most powerful of our societies, such as multinational companies that are actors, are not persons, but are actors that are very powerful and that shape policies across the world, and the super rich don't pay their fair share of taxes. When you see that, social trust gets hurt. And the social contract that is based in the majority of constitutions of democracies is broken, because the idea of progressive taxation, the idea of the ones that most have must contribute to our social pact, gets hurt because of this. When people see this, they lose trust in the very principles of democracy, and this is very important. But also, the extreme concentration of wealth gives you political power, and with this political power, you can shape the institutions, and you can shape the main policies, main fiscal policies that will give you more power and more wealth. So all these things all together, what result is in a breath for demagogue and populist discourse, and a loss of trust in democracy. So this is very important. We must know that taxes, well designed and focusing on, for example, in the case of the very rich, we're not speaking about one person that has a house or a car. We are speaking about the super rich, the 3,000 most rich people in the world, that today are paying between 0.5 and 1.5% of their wealth in effective taxation. So this is very low. And when you see this, of course, people are going to lose trust in the system, and this is very worrying.
The argument that is often made, and Gilad, I'll come to you, by individuals and corporates, individuals that have amassed a great deal of wealth will say, well, I've worked hard for it, I deserve it. And government then can't try and get its money on my money, because this is my benefit for all of the hard work and energy I've put into it. On the corporate end, it is often used as a tool to either incentivize or disincentivize corporates from operating within a particular jurisdiction. So the minute you talk about increasing corporate income taxes, suddenly there's talk about how companies will move, they'll relocate to other parts of the world where it's cheaper to do business. So speak to me then about how you counter some of those arguments and why this is still a valid proposition in spite of what is often then on the other side.
Mm. I think it's important to just separate between corporates and individuals a little bit here. On the corporate front, the first thing I think is, it's important for us to say that every corporate and every individual is making money on the back of the infrastructure which is provided through the government services, whether that's roads, rails, ports, whether that is the education which we get for our workforce at our schools and our universities, whether that's healthcare, whether that's internet infrastructure, and so on. So that income and that expenditure which government lays out is using taxpayers' money is what enables businesses and individuals to earn, and so everyone's benefited from government spending. In fact, government spending globally has been vital for all of the major forms of innovation which we see in our economy. The internet, various healthcare advances, all of that is underpinned by government spending. On the corporate side, it's also important to note that corporate income tax is a tax on profit. It is a tax on which does not tax corporate expenditure on investment. Okay, so a corporate can invest somewhere. It can build a new factory. It can hire labor. That portion of its revenue isn't being taxed. What is being taxed is what is being earned in profit, right? And that's and so arguments that income tax will disincentivize in investment are obviously are often made as a mischievous way to try and lower the corporate income. For individuals, I mean, sure, all of us contribute. Some people might argue they don't want to. I'm sure that some of those people have also benefited from government services or inheritance. But irrespective, what's important is that everyone's paying their fair share, and there's just no justification that the ultra wealthy, because they earn their income not from labor, not from a salary, but because they earn their income from owning assets and from wealth, that therefore they should pay less tax than a person working on a factory floor or in a hospital. I mean, it's just not a viable proposition.
Okay, we're going to continue with this conversation shortly. It's 11:30.
Thank you, Cathy. In the news headlines, ANC Chief Whip Dumiseni Ntuli has opposed advocacy group My Vote Counts for challenging the Political Funding Act. The matter is set to be heard in the Western Cape High Court today. The body of an illegal miner has been retrieved from a disused Zwartkrans gold mine in Mokopane, Limpopo. Police say the body was buried under large rocks in the shaft, and the British Prime Minister has said the UK is ready and willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine as part of a peace settlement. A full update follows at the top of the hour.
Okay, Lhasa, we are recording 3, 2, 1, go.
A cold case is opened 39 years later after the body of a young man is discovered in a derelict building. There are 4 suspects. Suspect 1, a clergyman. Suspect 2, an eminent entrepreneur.
I really, those people are always shady.
Suspect 3, a community worker.
Hey, what are you saying?
And suspect 4, a wheelchair-bound husband caring for his wife.
Hey, and the fella you can't.
Each has a secret to hide. As their lies unravel, the people that they love the most begin to wonder what else they might be capable of. Nothing in this case is black and white. Can you ever really know the people closest to you? What secrets have they buried? Tune into Unforgotten Season 1, Monday to Wednesday at 9 p.m. Starts 24 February only on S3. Tabo, don't tell me that the script freaked you out. Where are you?
The thirst to play the beautiful game is too high in the Banyana camp as they get ready to face Lesotho this weekend. Desiree Ellis Girls will be playing their first match of 2020 against Southern African neighbors in an international friendly at Sakane Stadium. There will be no love shared amongst neighbors on the field of play. Show your love for Banyana. Tune in live to SABC 1 and your favorite SABC radio station this Sunday at 3 p.m. Brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point, tax, justice and solidarity. How to reform the tax system, right, to ensure not only the better protection of democracy, but also what to do with these individuals who hide their money with corporates, who also hide their money, in the end, get away with not paying what is due. We are in conversation with Alejandro Rodriguez Lach, who is the head of advocacy at the Independent Commission for the Reform of International Corporate Taxation, and Dr. Gilad Isaacs, Executive Director of the Institute for Economic Justice. And he recently spoke at a forum that was held dealing with this very issue. Rex, you're calling us from Lydenburg. Good morning to you.
Morning, yeah. The first very easy question is, what exactly have you got against just plain, simple, good governance? Better service delivery, an end to corruption, just plain, simple, good governance. The second point that you guys never mentioned is that it's an entrepreneur that pays his workers wages. They take that money and they pay tax on it and they pay VAT. They pay VAT on it. So in actual fact, it is the entrepreneur that generates all the wealth. It is not the government. And I've never bought into this Marxist smash and grab Buddha economics, this stuff, this idea of robbing Paul to pay Peter. It's just not sustainable. It's just plain, simple, good governance. And the free market democracy is the best system going right now. The Chinese have got a system that works for them. But to implement the Chinese system on South Africa, yourself and 90% of the people that have ever phoned into this program are dead or in jail. So there is no better system than the free market democracy system. Because earlier people were talking about democracy being bad. It's a good system.
So Rex, in terms of a context, right, which our guests have set out, which is a global context in which the super rich actually use their wealth to evade paying taxes. So what then happens is that, yes, you have the implementation of laws, and that speaks to the governance aspect that you're pointing us to, but that only applies to those that are unable to do what the super rich can do.
Okay, if you've ever had a bookkeeper, you see him once a year, and then he fiddles the books and he does his magic, but it's legal. He doesn't do anything illegal. If somebody does something illegal,
then you catch him and you put him in jail.
But there's a difference
as simple
between
as that.
tax avoidance and tax evasion, Rex. I'm not talking
Well,
about
tax evasion is illegal.
yes, I'm not talking about legitimate tax avoidance. We're talking here tax evasion, and I think that that's the point that our guests are raising. I could be wrong, but I'll give them a chance to come in to answer your questions.
But you do have a system in place, and they tweak it every couple of years. They tweak it, but it should work if you had good governance, if you had competent people working in the Treasury.
Okay,
it should
Rex.
work. There's nothing wrong with the system. But you have a lack of good governance. But good governance in this country is a white supremacist, racist plot, and the ANC doesn't do good governance because it's something the DA does.
Okay, Rex, just stay on the line for me. Gillard, do you want to respond to some of Rex's questions?
Sure. I mean, I'm in favor of good governance, and I have no qualms saying that, and support that in all of its elements. At this conference was one speaker who is the one of the heiresses of the Disney family fortune. She's Walt Disney's brother's granddaughter, right? And she has inherited enormous wealth. And she was saying how she pays legally a lower tax rate than her secretary, right? That's the legal law. Now, I'm sorry, I think that's a bad law. And you know, this country has a well-known history of just because something's legal, it doesn't make it right. We have a tax system which was developed for a certain economy about 100 years ago, right? And that system needs updating to accommodate for the ways in which the economy works now. And that system's got various loopholes which we should close. That's not, as the Rex said, some odd, strange Marxist plot. That's just another form of good governance, that we ensure that that everybody, including really rich people and corporations, are going to be taxed to pay their fair share. I mean, I find it hard to think that's a controversial notion.
Okay, Rex, I hope you answered.
Another question, quickly. Okay, there's an old adage that it takes 3 generations to make a fortune, and it takes 1 or 2 generations to lose it.
Mm-hmm.
So that Disney's granddaughter, whatever it is, the next generation, you'll probably find they got nothing. And all business people, from the Magog selling fresh fruit and vegetables on the street to support their grandkids, right up to Rupert himself, they're rewarded for good decisions, they're punished for bad decisions. And all these super rich families, they take 3 generations, roughly 3 generations to lose it, because there are a whole lot of people that want to take that money off, and that is how the free market works. People making good decisions are rewarded, people making bad decisions are punished.
Okay.
It's the only system that works.
Okay.
And then they do, as far as I know, they do reform the tax laws in this country every year.
Cathy, it's hard for me to listen in South Africa to the notion that wealth in this country is accrued on the basis of only on the basis of one's hard work and good decisions. I am the beneficiary as a white South African of a terribly unequal and unfair system. It's impossible to argue that the distribution of wealth in South Africa is on the basis of exclusively on the basis of hard work and decisions made, and that has to also be accounted for when we think about what do we do to ameliorate the type of wealth inequalities which we have um, uh, uh, in this country, and what's the legitimate role of the tax system to ensure that we have a fairer and more equitable distribution of wealth.
I want to bring in the contributions of another listener who says, tax the super rich as much as you want. The new tax money will never reach the economy as is reasoned. Corrupt politicians and corrupt bureaucrats will again steal the new tax money. The super rich will definitely contribute to aid relief, but they do not want to, because the super rich know very well how corrupt politicians and bureaucrats are. That is why they do not want to pay tax. Alejandro, let me bring you in here. Is that an argument that you have heard around why it simply won't work?
Yes, Cathy, and certainly this is an argument, and corruption is an argument that is often used to not be willing to pay taxes. Just let me mention that in the conversations and the proposals to reforming the international tax system, there are also some good governance and anti-corruption measures that are proposed. Just to mention one, for example, how to be more transparent on asset ownership. So when there are corruption schemes, these schemes are often include shell companies on trust that only exist in papers in tax havens, where the stolen assets coming from corruptions are taken to. So one of the proposals is to create a global asset registry that identifies the beneficial owners of the wealth and the assets, not the legal owners, because usually a legal owner is a person that doesn't have any connection with the real owner of this wealth. If we shed light into asset ownership, this contributes a lot in terms of fighting corruption and stolen asset recovery. And this is something that especially African countries and Latin American countries where I come from are fighting for. Is a way to recover assets. But just let me also mention something else related to that. This is kind of a chicken and egg dilemma, because people say, I don't pay taxes because there is corruption, or because I don't see it in public goods and services that the government is providing. Because people don't pay taxes, then the governments have not had enough resources to invest in these public services and infrastructure that contributes to people thinking, okay, as I don't see this, I will not pay. So this is kind of a toxic circle, if you may say, or a bad circle that we must break. We need to ensure that the most powerful and the ones that are concentrating incoming wealth pay their share. But at the same time, we need to be vigilant, and we need to push for transparency and into anti-corruption measures to ensure and push for accountability of our governments to ensure that these resources that governments receive from taxation are well used.
Hi, Cathy. I completely disagree with your caller from Ladenburg, who compares an heiress from Disney, a great-granddaughter of Walt Disney's brother, and me, and I'm using that in general terms, a lady who's selling magwinya on the corner of the street to raise my children. We can never, ever come from the same we don't come from the same background in terms of the privilege that she has versus me. And governance is not going to resolve that. It's only change in the laws that will change that and make it equitable access to the economy, and how taxation is administered must be also in the context of that equitability.
Okay, thanks for that contribution. Dr. Gillard, let me give you the last word then on this conversation. Great to see that it is taking place on an international level, but it looks like there's still a long way to go. So in the meantime, what do we do?
Absolutely, there is a long road ahead, and I am sympathetic to this anger which South Africans have after the misuse of our tax money. But the solution then is obviously to redouble efforts to hold those in power accountable. In terms of the way forward, the most significant thing underway at the moment is at the UN, which is the drafting of a framework agreement for how countries should cooperate on these questions of international taxation. And we should call on our own government to play a active and vocal role there, to use their influence in multinational fora such as the G20 and BRICS, and to make sure that our domestic legislation is aligned to advance a form of taxation that's equitable and fair.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you both for your time to this conversation. Thank you for tuning in over the last couple of hours on the mid-morning talking point. We're back with you again tomorrow between 9 and midday. Up next is the book reading.
If you're active on social media and love SAFM, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAFM page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAFM, leading the conversation.
The book reading. Please note that the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SAFM presents another episode of the book These Things Really Do Happen to Me by Kaya Dlang, read by Lerato Mvelase.
Act my personality, not my age. Someone asked me a very interesting question on Twitter. What's your secret to always being happy? The first thing I thought was, am I actually always happy? The truth is, I am happy. A lot. Sometimes it feels like we are not supposed to say or show how happy we are. I think happiness has a lot to do with actively getting rid of negative energies. So my answer to this question was, I don't hold grudges. If you hold grudges, you are actively participating in your own unhappiness. I don't spend time thinking about what could have been. It's gone. No use thinking about it. I don't dislike others. It's negative. I do not control others. If you try to control someone else, there must be something profoundly unhappy in you. I give people freedom to be themselves because I also want to be comfortable with me being me. I don't take myself too seriously. People who take themselves too seriously spend too much time telling themselves what they are not supposed to do. They are more concerned about appearances than the satisfaction of their soul. I try as much as I can to not deny my soul. I don't spend too much time wondering what people think about me. I'm perfectly happy being silly and living a childish existence.